The first pictures with this camera were not great. Then something started to change, and 1000 photos later, it became one of my favorite cameras. When it comes to these 20-year-old cameras, I think you usually don't buy them because you really expect them to improve your photography in any technical way, and you really don't expect them to be the best photography tool there is. I personally bought this camera at the end of last year to have something to shoot with during the winter and not think about it being ruined by rain or snow. So something tough and relatively cheap so that I wouldn't need to baby this camera and maybe experiment a bit. Pentax cameras are generally famous for their robust weather sealing, and to use the most cliche phrase there is, this Pentax K10D is built like a tank. Just note that, as usual, not all lenses are weather sealed, so I decided to buy this weather resistant version of the kit lens for $40 extra. Now, after several months of using this camera in many different conditions, if you ask me how exactly weather resistant this camera is, my answer would be yes. But now, after about 1000 photos, it is becoming much more than just a bad weather camera for me, and I dare even say it is becoming one of my favorites, especially in this category of older or vintage cameras for $100 or less. And this is despite the fact that I did struggle with this camera quite a bit at the beginning. Also, it really makes me want to try more Pentax DSLRs, which I might do in the near future, so subscribe now if you don't want to miss it. And I hope by the end of this video I could spread my love for this particular camera to more people. Released in 2006, the Pentax K10D has a 10 megapixel APS-C size CCD sensor. And just quickly translating it to non-camera nerd people out there, this is the same sensor size as most of the modern mirrorless cameras. Like almost all modern Fujifilm cameras have an APS-C size sensor. And the only major difference is that this camera uses a CCD sensor technology instead of a modern CMOS. Many people associate CCD sensors with vintage look and colors, and this sensor is very nice and somewhat film-like, but many photographers who actually do some experiments find that this vintage look has more to do with the actual color science of the sensor than with the sensor technology. And in the early 2000s, when this camera came out, it was still the time of transition from film to digital, so many camera companies actually tried to kind of adapt color science to be a bit more film-like. With this Pentax, it took me some time to find the JPEG settings that I would really enjoy. Like, it leans heavily into magenta, so you need to tweak the white balance compensation a little. But luckily this camera does allow you to do that, and also tweak more settings like sharpness and contrast, which again opens up some room for recipe experimentation if you like. Also, the pictures turned out really dark on neutral exposure compensation, so I had to set exposure compensation to +1 to get somewhat decent results. I do really like the raw files from this camera though, and recently I have been shooting raw most of the time. The whole photography process turns out to be actually pretty fast and consistent because the raw files from this camera don't need a lot of adjustments, so I just created a Lightroom preset for myself with just minimal adjustments to apply it to all photos. And I'm still surprised by how much detail and contrast you get in the files from this old camera. And I really fell in love with Pentax colors because again, you really don't need a lot of adjustments to make the pictures from this K10D look really great. Another thing I love is that Pentax has had the same lens mount for the last 50 years, since 1975. Firstly, this is kinda incredible and I think Pentax deserves a lot of credit for that. But secondly, it means you have a very big choice of lenses, and also you can use all vintage Pentax lenses or third-party lenses with a Pentax K mount without any adapter. And look how nice and compact it looks with this Pentax 50mm f2 lens. The only issue is that you get this 1.5 times crop factor on the APS-C sensor, so this 50mm lens is actually 75 on this particular camera, but I think this is acceptable. I do want to get a hold on the full-frame Pentax K1 now, but probably not in the near future. But in general, using vintage lenses on this Pentax K10D makes the whole experience even more slow and analog, and the pictures turned out really special. I also ended up really liking the size and feel of this camera. When I take this Pentax after a lot of time with digicam, so just smaller mirrorless cameras, my hand just immediately relaxes because of how much more comfortable it is to hold it. It is a bit heavy, but not to the extent that would make you feel tired or something. And you also get a lot of buttons and dials, which are all just in the right places. And I really like this top plate LCD with some basic information, which is really convenient. And because it is a DSLR, you get this satisfying mirror slap and haptic feedback when you take a shot. feel like it makes me a bit addicted to taking pictures. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I did struggle with this camera quite a lot when I just got it, and the main issue was actually autofocus. My standards for the autofocus speed are actually pretty low, I would say, and I almost never use any intelligent features on modern cameras like subject detection, apart from when I need to record a video. But this Pentax K10D was missing autofocus on almost every shot, and by too far, even though the picture looked perfectly fine in the viewfinder before taking the shot. After some research, I diagnosed my particular camera with a back focusing issue, which is when the camera actually focuses on a subject that is a bit behind the focus point. But luckily it was fixable. I had to disassemble it a bit and take the bottom part out, and then turn some screws inside the camera to adjust the focusing mechanism. And this was actually just a long trial and error process when you adjust the screws and then take a picture to see if it's actually better or not. There is an old instruction video somewhere on the internet, which I think I will link somewhere below just in case. And other Pentax DSLRs actually have a software solution for this particular issue. But now after my adjustments, the autofocus works well when it actually does. It is still very slow and you cannot fully rely on it 100%, so you need to take several pictures just to make sure that one of them will turn out to be fine. But you learn to work with it, even if it means taking several shots sometimes. And I think in the end, it's just part of this more slow and thoughtful experience of using older or vintage cameras, and to some extent maybe these imperfections are part of the reason why we still like to use them. In general, I give this Pentax K10D a big like, and I will definitely continue shooting with it. An APS-C CCD sensor with great colors and contrast in a comfortable body that you can use in any weather conditions or with vintage lenses without an adapter sound like a great recipe to me. And I start to suspect that it will not be my last Pentax DSLR, but for now, thank you for watching and see you next time.